If you're planning a trip to the Galapagos, you're probably trying to decide whether you should take a cruise, book a group tour, or do it all yourself. Now, I did something a little different. I skipped the cruise, but I also didn't fully DIY this trip either. I took a private land-based tour with Galakiwi. Now, this is not necessarily the normal way that people visit the Galapagos. I kind of stumbled into this in-between option, and I'm actually really glad that I did. But this was by no means the cheapest way to visit the Galapagos, and I'll show you the actual numbers in this video, including what it looked like for 2 people versus a group tour option that I was originally quoted for. But before we get into the spreadsheet part of this, because yes, there is a spreadsheet, I'm going to talk about what was actually all included and whether or not I would do it this way again. Hello, I'm Lindsay from Have Clothes Will Travel, and today's video is all about my experience taking a private land-based tour of the Galapagos. Now, full disclosure, this is not a paid sponsorship with Galakiwi. I paid for this trip myself. I do get a small commission if you mention Have Clothes Will Travel or my name when you book a trip with Galakiwi, but as always, this video is my honest experience of using their services in the Galapagos. Now, how I ended up using Galakiwi, because this was not my original plan. Originally, I was supposed to be hosting a group tour where Trova Trip was handling all of the logistics. And needless to say, that was a disaster. I have a full story about that situation that I'll link to in the video description if you want the tea on that. But the short version of this story is I decided to not move forward with Trova Trip, and I started reaching out to different Galapagos land-based tour companies. And there were definitely lower prices out there. Galakiwi was by no means the cheapest quote that I received, but they were the best in terms of helpfulness in their communication. After I jumped on my first call with Karen, I felt so confident booking with them. She was so helpful and patient, and anytime I communicated with her, she was really quick to respond. And this was really important to me because I was already coming from a standpoint of a very messy planning situation. Galakiwi also had really strong reviews, and they came recommended to me from a couple different travel forums that I'm part of. So I wasn't just looking for the lowest price. I also wanted a tour company that seemed like they knew what they were doing and they weren't going to make this planning process any more stressful. I also like that Galakiwi is not some huge faceless company that's booking trips all over the world. They're based in the Galapagos, and I actually got to meet Karen when I was in Quito. And I even got to meet the Kiwi from Galakiwi when I was in San Cristóbal, which I really appreciated. And at first, the plan was to have a group of us going to the Galapagos, but once we started getting into final payments and commitments, not all of the group members were able to commit. So this trip ended up just being my husband and myself, which honestly, the older that I get, I'm realizing that I prefer to travel this way and just go at my own pace. So it was okay. And fortunately, Galakiwi was able to change this trip for a 2-person trip, no problem at all. It was amazing. Now, what Galakiwi handled? For our trip, Galakiwi handled the big moving pieces. They did the itinerary, the hotels, transportation between the islands, airport transfers, guided excursions, all the equipment we needed for our activities, most of the meals, and our private naturalist guide. And the activities were a big part of the value here. This was not just someone booking hotels and transfers for us. I mean, we were staying on Santa Cruz, Isabela, and San Cristóbal with ferries, an inter-island flight, snorkeling trips, kayaking, a volcano hike, and different hotels all built into this plan. I'm going to keep this overview quick because I have a full 8-day Galapagos itinerary video that shows the whole route and what each day looked like for us, so I'll link that if you want a more visual version. But the reason I want to show this here is that it helps explain the cost. This was a full multi-island itinerary, not just lodging and a few transfers. The thing I appreciated most about this was not having to worry and waking up every morning not having to think, okay, who's picking us up? Did I book the right ferry tickets? Do we have enough time? Where do I need to be? It was all taken care of. And that made this trip so much smoother. The private guide was probably the biggest reason I'm so happy we did the trip this way. Our guide was Bernie, and he was fantastic. He gave us so much better context for the wildlife, the islands, the history, the conservation work, where to go, what to look for, and what we were actually seeing. I mean, you can see a bird or an iguana and think, oh, that's cool. But when you actually have some context behind what you're seeing, it makes it so much more meaningful. And Bernie is also an accomplished photographer and was really helpful with my photography, which I appreciated. And he kept everything moving on time, which that doesn't sound like a big deal, but in the Galapagos, timing matters. You have boats, transfers, excursions, flights, and days where there is just a lot to line up. We still had the land-based experience I wanted with the hotels and restaurants and some free time around town, but we also had structure where it mattered. And for me, that ended up being the ideal balance. So now let's talk about pricing. And I want to be really clear that my pricing might be different from your pricing. This itinerary was originally built as a private group trip, not a standard group tour that anyone could just join. So the costs changed depending on how many people were going. For the original private group version, which was based on 8 to 12 travelers, the base tour price was listed at $3,555 per person. But once the trip ended up being just my husband and me, the two-person private version was listed at $4,585 per person. So going from the original private group quote to the two-person private quote made the base tour price just over $1,000 more per person. And I mean, that makes sense. With a private trip, the fewer people you have, the fewer people there are to spread out the cost of the guide, logistics, transport, and planning. That's why I think a trip like this could be especially interesting for a family or a group of friends that are traveling together. And then on top of the base tour price, the Galapagos flight was listed separately at $615 per person. There was also required cash fees that were not included, and these were the $200 Galapagos National Park entrance fee, the $20 Ingala fee, and the $10 Isabela pier tax. So before guides, tips, and drinks, the original 8-person private group quote came out to about $4,400 per person. Then for the 2-person private version, it came out to about $5,430 per person before guide tips and drinks. Now, tips for the guide were also not included. The original group quote suggested around $8 to $10 per person per day, with the 2-person quote suggesting around $10 to $12 per person per day. And of course, tipping is discretionary. So my biggest advice would be to ask for the details and the breakdown before booking. And I was super happy with how transparent Galakiwi was with sharing the pricing details with me. It was fantastic. So should you DIY the Galapagos or use a tour company? This is going to depend on your travel style preference and your budget. If you're somebody who loves travel planning and wants to save some money, DIYing this trip is absolutely possible. However, if you're somebody who does not enjoy the logistics that are involved in this, and you still want to stay within a reasonable budget, I think there are some fantastic cruise options out there. However, if you're somebody who wants to do a land-based tour, you want to experience the islands and the local cuisine and culture, and have the context of using a private guide, I think that a private land-based tour option is fantastic. Again, it's not the cheapest way to see the Galapagos, but I honestly wouldn't have done it any differently. I'm really happy that I stumbled onto this way of traveling there. So final verdict. Was this tour with Galakiwi worth it? Yes, for us, it was worth it. Again, this wasn't the cheapest option I found, but it was definitely the option that I felt the most comfortable with. And now that it's all said and done, I am so happy that I booked with Galakiwi. This honestly became one of the easiest trips that I've ever booked, despite the bumpy start that I had with Trova Trip. Karen just made this whole process feel super easy and exciting, and I loved it. Bernie added so much context once we actually got to the islands, and the trip itself had the exact balance that I wanted. We had enough structure that I wasn't managing every little thing, but enough freedom to still feel like our trip. Now, I'll link my 8-day Galapagos itinerary video if you want to see the exact route we followed, and I'll also link the Trova Trip story if you want the background on how this trip started. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. And thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this Galapagos video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more travel content like this.